The fracture of the mundane. The silence in the house had changed. For 22 years, the quiet of her home had been a warm blanket, a testament to a life well built. But now, as Elena stood in the kitchen staring at the steam rising from her coffee, the silence felt like a jagged blade. At 45, she had believed she was beyond the age of reckless mistakes. She was a woman of lists, of garden schedules, of "I love you" whispered into the crook of a familiar neck before sleep. Then came that Tuesday in Chicago. A freak snowstorm, a grounded flight, and a hotel bar that smelled of expensive bourbon and desperation. She hadn't gone looking for it. That was the ghost that haunted her most, the sheer accident of it. She had been exhausted, her nerves frayed by a grueling conference, when she met Julian. He was older, with silver at his temples and a voice like velvet over gravel. They started talking about architecture, then about the bittersweet reality of watching children grow up, and finally, about the quiet loneliness that settles into a marriage after 2 decades. The shift was invisible until it was absolute. One moment she was Elena, the faithful wife, the next, she was a woman caught in a gravitational pull she didn't have the strength to fight. The storm outside had created a vacuum, a world where her real life didn't exist. Now, back in her sun-drenched kitchen, the memory of his hand on her waist felt like a burn mark. Every time her husband, David, walked into the room, she felt a physical jolt of panic. She would look at his hands that had held her through 3 pregnancies and the death of her father, and feel a wave of nausea so profound she had to grip the counter to stay upright. The betrayal wasn't just a choice, it felt like a mutation of her very soul. She had brought a stranger into the sacred space of their US, and she didn't know how to breathe the air here anymore. The haunting wasn't constant, it was episodic. It came in the shower, when the hot water mimicked the heat of that night. It came when she lay next to David at 3 a.m., listening to his rhythmic, trusting breathing. Her mind was a traitorous projector, replaying scenes she tried to incinerate. She remembered the way the light from the street lamp had filtered through the hotel curtains, casting long, amber stripes across the bed. She remembered the shocking intensity of a different touch, the way Julian's skin felt rougher than David's, the way his breath smelled of salt and peat. In her memories, the intimacy was intertwined with a terrifying sense of discovery. She hated herself for remembering the way her body had responded, the treacherous, electric spark of being new to someone. It was a sensory overload that now felt like a curse. She would find herself staring at her own reflection in the vanity mirror, tracing the lines around her eyes, wondering if the scene was visible. Did her skin look different? Did her eyes carry the shadow of that hotel room? She felt like a ghost inhabiting her own life. She would cook dinner, answer emails, and fold David's shirts, all while a screaming monologue ran through her head. "I am not who you think I am. I have ruined everything." The despair was a heavy, wet coat she couldn't take off. She realized that the accidental nature of the affair didn't make it lighter, it made it more terrifying. It meant that the person she thought she was, the moral, steadfast woman, was a fiction that could be dismantled by a storm and a glass of whiskey. The pain wasn't just about the betrayal of David, it was the total loss of her own self-image. Weeks turned into months, and the weight of the secret began to manifest physically. Elena lost weight. Her sleep became a series of shallow, panic naps. David noticed, of course. He was a good man, a perceptive man. "You're drifting, Elle," he told her one evening on the porch. He took her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles in that way he'd done for 20 years. "Is it the kids? Is it work? Talk to me." His kindness was a torture device. Each tender word felt like a lash. She wanted to scream the truth just to stop the pressure building behind her ribs. She wanted to fall at his feet and beg for a punishment that would match the scale of her guilt. But she remained silent. She realized that telling him might ease her burden, but it would destroy his peace. It was a new, bitter kind of responsibility. Carrying the rot alone so the garden could stay green for him. She began to avoid intimacy with him. How could she lie there, in the bed they had chosen together, and let him touch the body that still held the phantom echoes of another? When they did find each other in the dark, she would close her eyes and pray for the memories to stay away, but they were relentless. A certain tilt of the head, a specific sigh, everything became a comparison, a reminder of her infidelity. She started taking long walks, sometimes for hours, trying to outrun her own mind. She looked at other women her age on the street, women in sensible coats, women carrying groceries, and wondered how many of them were also carrying a corpse in their basement. She felt an agonizing isolation. She was mourning the death of her innocence, a mourning she could never share with a soul. The unforeseen circumstances had led her into a wilderness where there were no maps and no way back to the woman she used to be. Despair, she learned, has a plateau. Eventually, the sharp, jagged edges of the initial shock wore down into a dull, permanent ache. She began to understand that she would never get over it. This was her life now. A landscape of beautiful things seen through a veil of mourning. She began to look at her marriage through a different lens. The crisis of her 40-plus years hadn't been about a lack of love for David, but a sudden, violent confrontation with her own mortality and the fear that her story was already over. She saw now that the affair had been a desperate, unconscious attempt to feel a different version of herself before the clock ran out. It didn't excuse the pain, but it gave it a shape. One afternoon, she found herself in a small, quiet chapel she had never entered before. She didn't pray in a traditional sense. She simply sat in the dim light and asked the silence, "How do I live with this?" The answer that came wasn't a voice, but a feeling. She would live by becoming a better version of the woman she had betrayed. She would pour her guilt into a deeper, more conscious love for David. She would be more present, more patient, more appreciative of the mundane beauty they shared. It was a penance that would last a lifetime. She went home that day and looked at David. He was in the garden, pruning the roses, his back slightly bent with the years. She felt a surge of love so intense it brought tears to her eyes, a love fueled by the terrible knowledge of what she had almost thrown away. She walked out to him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and pressed her face into his sweater. "I love you," she whispered, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel like a lie. It felt like a vow. The memory of the hotel room was still there, a dark shadow in the corner of her mind, but she realized she could choose which light to walk in. She would live with the pain, she would carry the secret, and she would spend every remaining day building a bridge back to the man who didn't know he had lost her.